You probably know exactly how it feels when your phone rings and you see a number that you do not recognize, and you just sit there thinking about whether you should pick it up or just let it go to voicemail. Well, the person in the very first story we are going to talk about today really should have just ignored it, because it would have been much better for him if he did not answer. Anyway, as we start looking into the stories for this week, I want to let you know that I will be doing some small updates to my virtual room and also doing a little bit of exploring on my own. So, let us just start right away with the very first story that was sent in. This story comes from the Reddit page called r/nosleep, and it was written by a user named Logic. The person telling the story says that he works at a call center, and he has a specific person who keeps calling him over and over again to ask questions about things that have not even happened yet. He explains that he never really thought he would still be working at a call center when he reached the age of 28 years old, because that is usually the exact type of temporary job that a person only does while they are studying in college, just to make a little bit of extra money to buy their textbooks and pay for their drinks. But there he was, sitting with a headset on his head, watching the numbers on his screen go up as more people waited in line to talk to someone, while at the same time trying very hard not to think about the fact that his college degree in marketing had basically led him to absolutely nowhere in his career. He says that the job itself was not actually very hard to do because all he had to do was answer the phones, help the customers, reset their passwords when they forgot them, walk them through very basic computer problems, say sorry when the product they bought was broken, and always finish the call by telling them that they would get a short survey about the call and that their feedback was very important. He notes that most people would just hang up the phone before he could even finish saying that sentence. His work numbers were okay, not amazing, but good enough to keep his job, even though they were not good enough to get him a prize or a promotion. He felt like he was just a completely average person who did not stand out in any way, which was actually exactly how he wanted to be at that time in his life. The place where he worked was actually a very sad and depressing kind of environment to be in every single day, because it was filled with little office spaces that all looked exactly the same and were painted a dull gray color, and the bright artificial lights on the ceiling made a constant buzzing noise that was so annoying it actually gave him a headache all the time. There were also those motivational posters on the walls that the Human Resources Department probably thought were very inspiring, with phrases written on them like, "Every call is an opportunity," and "Your attitude determines your altitude." His own little office space was right in the middle of the floor, surrounded by 20 other people who were all talking on the phone with 20 different customers who were all very angry. He worked the evening shift, which meant he started at 3 in the afternoon and finished at 11 at night, so he did not have to wake up early, which was a good thing, but it also meant his sleep schedule was completely ruined and he had no social life with his friends at all. He did not really have a large group of friends anymore, because most of the people he knew from college had moved away, gotten better jobs, or gotten married. The friends he used to be close with were now all in couples and doing couple things, which made him feel like an extra third wheel whenever he went to a party. The guy he lived with in their apartment was a guy named Derek, and Derek had a very normal schedule where he worked during the regular daytime hours at a job that had something to do with looking at numbers and data, which Derek tried to explain to him one time, even though he honestly did not really understand what Derek was actually talking about. They got along fine as roommates because they always paid their bills on time, never left dirty dishes in the sink for more than a day, and sometimes watched a sports game together if they were both free, but they were not close friends at all, probably because neither of them had the emotional energy to be close friends. He was starting to feel really bad about his dating life, even more than he wanted to admit, because it had been almost 2 years since his last girlfriend broke up with him, and every time he tried to date someone new, it just did not work out. Dating apps were just full of people who ignored him or gave him one-word answers, and the few dates he actually went on were very awkward and led to nothing. He was starting to wonder if there was something wrong with him that everyone else could see but he could not, and his mom kept asking him if he was seeing anyone, while his sister stopped asking altogether, which actually made him feel even worse. All of this is just to explain that when the weird phone call started, he was already feeling very lonely and sad, feeling like he was stuck in a terrible job under bright lights, helping people with stupid problems, which made him the exact type of person who would be easily affected by something strange. The very first weird call happened on a Tuesday in October, right after he had just helped an old lady fix her email because she had been typing her password wrong for 3 days and was too embarrassed to tell anyone, and she was so happy that he thought she would give him a good score on his survey. But the very next call connected immediately, without any pause for him to take a breath, and the system just sent the next person right into his headset. He did his normal greeting, asking for their account number, but there was just silence on the other end, not a complete silence, but the kind of quiet where you can tell someone is there and breathing. He asked again if they could hear him, and a male voice said yes, but the voice had no emotion at all and no specific accent. When he asked how he could help, the voice said he was calling about the satisfaction survey. He looked at his computer screen, but there was no account information or call history showing up, so he told the guy that the survey happens after the call and he would get a text message with a link in 5 minutes. But the voice just ignored him and said he wanted to do it right now because it would only take a few questions. He tried to explain that the system does not work that way and asked if there was anything else he could help with, but the voice just kept talking as if he was not even there, asking him to rate his overall experience with a car crash on Route 47 on a scale of 1 to 10. His hand stopped moving over his mouse, and he asked the guy what he was talking about. The voice calmly repeated that it was about the accident on Route 47 that was going to happen on October 19th at around 6:23 in the evening, and asked if the emergency workers were polite. He started to get annoyed, thinking it was just a crazy person or a prank caller, and told the guy he was going to hang up. But the voice just kept asking if the airbag worked the way he expected it to. He just pressed the button to end the call and sat there for a minute, staring at his screen while his hands shook a little bit, wondering what the hell just happened. Around him, the call center was just making its normal noise, with his coworker Deb laughing at a joke and phones ringing in the background, so everything seemed totally normal and fine. He took the next call, which was just a normal guy who could not update his payment info, and it only took 4 minutes, so he tried to forget about the weird call. But it stayed in his head for the rest of his shift, especially the part about October 19th at 6:23 p.m. on Route 47. When he got home that night, Derek was already asleep, so he heated up some old pizza, sat on the couch and looked at his phone to relax. He opened his calendar and looked at October 19th, which was the next Friday, and he had the day off. He rarely drove on Route 47, but it was a big road in town that he had probably driven on many times, and there was nothing special about it. He thought about how the caller talked like it was a survey about something that had already happened, and he eventually fell asleep on the couch with the TV still on, dreaming about the bright office lights and ringing phones. The next call came 4 days later on a Saturday morning when he was not even working, but was at the grocery store trying to decide if he should spend $2 extra on fancy coffee or just buy the cheap one. His phone rang with an unknown number and he almost ignored it, but since he was applying for new jobs, he thought it might be a recruiter, so he answered it. The exact same flat voice said hello and asked if he had a minute for a brief satisfaction survey about his recent experience. He was standing in the coffee aisle at 10 in the morning, and his stomach dropped like he was on a roller coaster when he heard the voice. He asked how the guy got his number, but the voice just asked him to rate his experience with a job interview on November 2nd. He said he did not know what interview the guy was talking about, and the voice just kept going, asking if the interviewer at Merchants and Associates in Conference Room B at 2:30 p.m. explained the job requirements well. He had never applied to any place called Merchants and Associates, so he pulled the phone away from his face to look at the screen, which just said unknown number, and put it back to his ear to say he had no idea what the guy was talking about. The voice just asked how likely he was to recommend the interview to a friend, so he hung up and immediately blocked the number while his hands shook again. An old lady walking by gave him a worried look, and he realized he was just standing still in the middle of the aisle, breathing hard and probably looking crazy, so he left his shopping cart and walked out of the store. At home, he sat on his bed, unblocked the number, and looked at his call log, seeing the 2 calls from Tuesday and Saturday, both showing as unknown numbers even though he had blocked it. He searched for Merchants and Associates on the internet and found a few businesses in other cities like Chicago and Boston, but nothing local that matched his job skills. He wondered if it was harassment or a scam, but the guy never asked for money or personal info, just weird survey questions about the future. He thought about calling the police, but realized they would just tell him to block the number, which he already did. So he spent the rest of the weekend trying not to think about it by going to the gym, watching football, and ordering Chinese food. When October 19th finally came on a Friday, he stayed home all day to avoid driving on Route 47, telling himself he was being crazy and just watched TV. At 6:15 p.m., he was in the kitchen making a sandwich when his phone buzzed with a news alert saying a multi-car crash had closed Route 47 and 2 people were hurt, with the timestamp showing 6:24 p.m. He read it 3 times and opened the full article, which said 2 cars crashed at the intersection of Route 47 and Blackwell Road because one driver ran a red light, and the road would be closed for hours. He left his sandwich on the counter, read the article again, and then went to his room to check his phone's call history from October 15th, seeing the exact quote about the accident happening at 6:23 p.m., which was only 1 minute before the actual crash. He sat on the bed with weak legs, telling himself it was just a coincidence because Route 47 was a busy road and accidents happen there all the time. Okay, my friend, you are just in a state of complete denial right now, like a really high level of denial. Anyway, let us keep going. The guy had given him the exact date and a time that was only 1 minute off, so when his phone rang again with an unknown number, he just stared at it. He let it ring 4 or 5 times, thinking he should let it go to voicemail or block it or throw the phone out the window, but he finally answered it. The voice said hello and thanked him for his time, asking how he knew, and his voice cracked when he asked the question. The voice just ignored him and asked him to rate his Thanksgiving dinner at his sister's house on November 23rd, asking if the turkey was cooked right and if his diet was respected. He said he had not even talked to his sister about Thanksgiving yet, but the voice just kept asking about the seating arrangements and the family conversation. When he told the voice to stop, it asked how he was doing it, and then asked him to rate how traumatic the revelation from his father during dinner would be. His mouth got completely dry, and he asked what revelation the guy was talking about. The voice asked how likely he was to keep the same relationship with his family after the event, and he asked who the guy was, but the call just clicked and ended. He tried to call back immediately, but it just went to a generic voicemail saying the number was not available, and he tried 5 more times with the same result. He checked his family group chat, which had not been used in 3 days, and called his sister, who sounded busy and said they had not decided where to have Thanksgiving yet. When he asked if their dad seemed okay lately, she said he seemed fine and asked if their mom had said something, but he just made an excuse and hung up, feeling stupid for even asking. He did not sleep well that night, and the next week at work was a blur because he kept his phone on silent in his locker and could not focus, which made his work numbers drop and his call times go up by 8 minutes. On Wednesday, his supervisor Tracy, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes who had worked in call centers for a long time, called him into her office to ask if everything was okay. He almost laughed and wanted to tell her that a guy who can predict the future was calling him with surveys about the future, but he just said he was distracted and promised to do better. She told him he had been there for 6 months and was a good worker when he focused and suggested he talk to HR about their counseling program if he had personal problems, but he just said he was fine even though he really was not. That evening, when he got home, he found a white envelope on the floor by the apartment door with his name written on it in very neat handwriting, with no stamps or return address. Derek was in the kitchen cooking something that smelled like garlic and onions, and when he asked if Derek saw anyone deliver it, Derek said no and assumed it was just a neighbor who dropped it. He thought about throwing it away or taking it to the police, but he opened it and found a single piece of paper with the same neat handwriting. It was a satisfaction survey for him, Aaron Mitchell, dated November 2nd, 2024, at 2:30 p.m. at Merchants and Associates in Conference Room B, asking him to rate the interviewer's professionalism, his own preparation, his confidence, his performance, and how likely he was to accept the job. It also had a comment saying the interviewer would ask about his employment gap from March to August 2023, that he would make up a lie about it, that it would not hurt his chances, and that he would get the job offer on November 8th for a starting salary of $52,000, which was $8,000 less than he wanted but $12,000 more than he made now, and that he would accept it. His hands were shaking so hard the paper made a noise, and when Derek asked if he was okay from the kitchen, he lied and said he just found a package. He went to his room, closed the door, and stared at the letter, thinking about the employment gap from March to August 2023, which was the time when his girlfriend Rachel broke up with him and he fell into a deep depression, quit his job, and just played video games in his apartment for 6 months. He had put on his resume that he was doing freelance consulting during that time, which was a lie to hide his depression, and no one knew about it except Rachel, who he had not talked to since. He searched for the company again with his city's name and finally found a small consulting firm that had only opened a local office 3 weeks ago, with a very basic website and a generic email address for jobs. He sat there for a long time, and then he did something very stupid and sent an email to that address, saying he was a marketing professional with 5 years of experience looking for a new job and asking if they had any openings. Yeah, he definitely wrote that part using an AI chatbot. He clicked send before he could change his mind, and then went to the kitchen to ask Derek if he wanted to play video games, which they did for a couple of hours while killing zombies and not talking about anything important, which made him feel the most normal he had felt in weeks. The next morning, he got a reply from a woman named Jennifer Casto, who was the HR manager, saying his background looked like a good match and asking if he could come in for an interview on November 2nd at 2:30 p.m. at their office on Commerce Street. He stared at the email on his phone while sitting in his car in the call center parking lot at 8:47 a.m., 15 minutes before his shift started. And he knew he absolutely could not go to this interview because it would mean the letter was real and someone knew the future. He should have deleted the email and blocked the number and told someone. But instead, he replied saying that time worked perfectly for him and he looked forward to meeting them, wondering what the hell he was doing. The next week and a half felt like forever, and he just went through the motions at work and applied for other jobs. But he did not get any more calls or letters, which should have made him feel better but actually made it worse because he was just waiting for the next thing to happen. He told his supervisor he had a doctor's appointment and needed to leave early on November 2nd, and she said yes without asking any questions. The night before the interview, he could not sleep and just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about every possible explanation, like it being a scam, a stalker, a prank, a mental breakdown, or something completely impossible. At 2:15 p.m. on November 2nd, he was sitting in his car outside the modern glass and steel office building, wearing his only nice suit and carrying 3 printed copies of his resume, still thinking about just driving away and pretending none of this happened. But he went inside, took the elevator to the 3rd floor, and sat in the small, new-looking reception area until exactly 2:30 p.m., when a woman in her 50s named Jennifer came out and introduced herself. Okay, a quick side note for everyone here. I know you are probably wondering the exact same thing, but did this guy ever stop to think for even 1 second that maybe this weird thing was actually trying to help him? Because first, it helped him avoid a terrible car crash, and now it is helping him get a brand new job. I mean, come on. Anyway, let us just keep going with the story. She led him down a short hall to conference room B, which was a small room with a table, 4 chairs, and a window where he could see his car in the parking lot. The interview was very normal and boring, with Jennifer asking about his background and why he wanted a new job, and he told the truth about everything except the employment gap, where he lied and said he was freelance consulting. She just nodded and wrote something down, and then explained that the job was a junior marketing associate doing client outreach and social media, paying between $48,000 and $55,000. They talked for 45 minutes, and then she said she thought he would be a strong candidate and would be in touch soon. He thanked her and left, and when he got to his car, he just sat there breathing hard with shaking hands because the interview had happened exactly like the letter said, down to the room number and the question about his employment gap. On November 8th, Jennifer called him to offer him the job for $52,000, and he accepted it. Thanksgiving came around, and even though he thought about faking being sick or just driving away until he ran out of gas to avoid whatever was supposed to happen, he ended up going to his sister Amanda's house, which was about 40 minutes away in a nice 2-story home with a big garden that he knew he could probably never afford. Her husband Tom was a pharmacist, and when he arrived at 1 in the afternoon, his parents and Tom's parents were already there, and everyone was in a good mood, smelling turkey and pie and watching football. They ate around 3 o'clock at a beautifully decorated table, and his dad, Harold, who was 62, bald, a little overweight, and retired from the power company, was in a great mood telling fishing stories. They went around the table saying what they were thankful for, and his mom talked about her future grandchildren, Tom talked about his family, Amanda talked about their house, his dad talked about retirement, and he talked about his new job starting in 2 weeks. Everything was completely perfect and normal until they were eating pie in the living room, and his dad suddenly put his plate down, cleared his throat, and said he needed to talk to everyone. The room got completely quiet, and his mom asked what was wrong, looking worried. His dad looked very uncomfortable, more than he had ever seen him, and cleared his throat again before saying he had been thinking about it for a long time and had even talked to a lawyer, and that he was planning to file for a divorce. Everyone gasped and went completely silent, and his mom turned pale and whispered, "What?" While his dad explained that he was just not happy anymore and had not been happy for a long time, and he wanted something different for the rest of his life. He just sat there frozen, unable to breathe, while his dad calmly explained he was ending a 35-year marriage, and his mom dropped her pie plate on the carpet and started yelling about how he was telling her this on Thanksgiving in front of everyone. The argument got super loud. His sister Amanda started crying. Tom tried to calm everyone down but made it worse, and Tom's parents just sat there looking like they wanted to disappear. He just sat there with his untouched pie, watching his family fall apart, and at one point, He just walked outside into the cold November air in the backyard to try and process what he had just seen. He pulled out his phone and looked at his call history, reading the questions about the seating arrangements and how traumatic his dad's revelation would be, realizing that whoever was calling him knew exactly what was going to happen, just like they knew about the car crash and the job interview. His phone rang with an unknown number, and he answered it, asking what the guy wanted. The voice said it was a follow-up survey about his Thanksgiving, and when he started to say no more surveys and threatened to call the police, the voice sounded different, almost not human, and said the police could not help him. When he asked what the guy wanted, the voice said it was there to warn him and prepare him, and then told him that on December 17th at 11:52 p.m., he would get a call from his mom saying his dad had a heart attack, and he would drive to St. Mary's Hospital and arrive at 12:34 a.m. to find his dad already dead. His legs gave out and he fell onto the cold ground, saying no, while the voice said it was calling to see if he was satisfied with the medical care his dad received and if he felt the doctors tried their best. When he yelled that the guy could not possibly know that, the voice said it knew everything that would ever happen to him, every call, every letter, every moment of sadness and joy, and even knew when he would meet his wife, the names of his kids, and what he would wear on the day he died. When he asked why this was happening, the voice said it was because he answered the phone because most people just hang up or block the number after the first call, but he answered, and now the guy could not stop calling him, so he would just stop answering, but he would answer on December 17th because humans always need to know. The call ended, and he just sat in the backyard for a long time, watching his family fight through the windows, knowing it was all happening exactly as predicted. He thought about December 17th and the phone ringing at 11:52 p.m., and he knew that even if he threw his phone away, changed his number, or moved to a different state, it would not matter because the calls would always find him since he had answered, and that was 3 weeks ago. He had blocked the number a bunch of times, changed his number twice, gone to the police who said they could not do anything without a direct threat, and seen a therapist who said he was having a stress-induced psychotic episode. He tried not to answer, but the phone would just ring for up to 16 hours straight, and he would finally break and answer after 14 hours, always hearing the same voice giving him surveys about his future, ranging from small things like a late flight or a parking ticket to big things like an illness, a funeral, or a betrayal. The hardest part was that he had actually started to rely on it because when something bad was going to happen, at least he knew about it early and could prepare himself and get ready for it, making the calls a weird form of comfort. His dad was actually still fine right now, by the way, because he called him after Thanksgiving to try and talk about his health, but his dad just brushed it off as an overreaction and they had not spoken since. December 17th was only 3 weeks away, and he had no idea what he was going to do when the phone rang, or if he should try to warn his dad or just spend the time enjoying what was left, wondering if anything he did would even matter. The hardest part was that he kept checking his phone, waiting for the next call and the next survey, because at least then he would know what was coming and would not have to deal with the uncertainty. His phone was ringing right at that very moment with an unknown number, and he already knew what the guy was going to ask before he even answered. How satisfied he was with how his life had changed since he answered that first call. He was going to answer it because he always did, because humans always need to know. Well, that was definitely a very crazy and extraordinary story. I kind of see it as having a sort of superpower, but at the same time, I am really not sure if I would actually want to know the future and everything that is going to happen to me. They say that ignorance is truly bliss, you know? But anyway, I am really curious to hear what all of you think about it. What would you guys do in that situation? Would you actually want something like that to happen to you? The next story for today was contributed by the very talented Trash Tia from the r/Carry Stories page on Reddit. The person telling this story strongly suspects that the cheerleading squad at their university is actually being used as some kind of weapons or tools by a dark force. They were a freshman in college and really wanted to make some connections and find new friends in their new community. They understood that the cheerleading squad was just an extracurricular club and not a real college major, so they decided to give it a try because they could not just ignore the group. On their very first day, while they were moving their boxes and bags into their dorm room, they must have accidentally bumped into the exact same girl 3 different times. They firmly believe that it is physically impossible for a normal human being to be happy all the time, but this girl was the exact definition of pure happiness. She walked around like the sun was shining directly out of her body, which was a feeling that was both really cute and also kind of creepy at the same time. The girl herself looked like the sun, with a halo of golden curly hair held back by a scrunchie, wearing a bright and colorful sundress, and matching ribbons tied around her wrists. The group was called the Sunbeam Squad, and they were very easy to spot because they all wore matching bright yellow clothes, carried golden streamers in their hands, and had ribbons tangled up in their hair. Their voices were always very high-pitched, sounding like they only breathed in helium gas. However, this had to be just an act they put on for the group, right? It was a little bit charming, and he had not expected such a welcoming group of people who looked like they walked right out of a children's TV show. The girl who handed him a flyer and loudly talked about school spirit was practically bouncing up and down with energy, with a huge smile on her face, so he just gave a polite nod, put the flyer in his bag, and went back to unpacking his room. When he looked out the window a few hours later, the Sunbeam Squad was still walking around the crowd, all of them wearing sparkling fairy lights that glowed in the sunset. Sunbeam. Yes, he totally got the concept. But it still felt like a little bit too much, and they were starting to give him the vibe of a cult. However, that did not stop him from trying to join them because he was reasonably athletic and they were exactly the kind of group he was looking for. He had never really had a group of people he could call his friends, and even though it was mostly his own fault because he was a total loner in high school, either working all the time or hiding in his room, he really regretted pushing people away and losing the chance to be close friends with them. Now, those people had their own lifelong friendships, and here he was at 18 years old with no one but childhood friends he only talked to once a year on the holidays. College was supposed to be a fresh start, and he talked to as many people as he could on the first day, slowly but surely making real friendships in his classes with people he actually wanted to hang out with. Joining the Sunbeam Squad was just his way of trying to extend that effort even further by joining a club. Through casual talks in his first few weeks, he learned that they were more of a fun extracurricular group that did not do competitive cheering, and had been started in the mid-90s by students who just wanted to build a community based on positivity and school spirit. The squad had a reputation as the university's mascot and good luck charm, and everyone on campus knew they were a big reason for the college's sports success over the last 30 years. Even though they seemed nice based on what others said, they were not a group that was easy to join unless you were already in it. He would see them walking across campus between classes, always moving together as a single unit with their arms linked, wearing the school colors. The guys wore loose varsity jackets and the girls wore cheerleading skirts, and the way they interacted was a little too close, like they were in a romantic comedy movie from the early 2000s. Their style was definitely captivating, making them look like untouchable gods on pedestals who ruled the campus, which only made him want to know them even more. So, he signed up for the tryouts, which turned out to be his first big mistake of his freshman year. He did not fully realize he was in over his head until he was standing in the college gym in front of a panel of 4 judges, like he was auditioning for a real movie. The Sunbeam Squad took their tryouts very seriously, which was weird since they were supposed to be super chill. There were about 50 applicants, and they were told to stand at the back wall and watch people audition one by one, which was already making him very anxious. He had planned a routine with a high V, a low V, a touchdown motion, and a backflip, feeling confident because his high school had a co-ed squad and he had learned a lot from watching the guys. But when he saw the other people doing impossible flips without safety mats and bending their bodies in ways he did not think were possible, he realized he was in trouble. His stomach twisted when he stepped onto the center stage, and the panel of 4 judges included the blonde girl who gave him the flyer on the first day. He was surprised when her eyes lit up with recognition, and she said she recognized him, with her smile getting even bigger and making her face glow. All 4 of them seemed to give off a warm light, and he felt himself relax a little, thinking maybe their positivity was not just an act. She asked his name, and he said Alex with a shy wave. She playfully nudged the redhead next to her, who was a guy he had seen around campus because he was always painted in bright colors and usually kept to himself. The redhead had bright red hair that clashed with his blue and gold football jersey, pale skin, and dark eyes that were staring right at him. The blonde girl tugged his sleeve and said she told him the annoying freshman would work out, and the redhead just chuckled, rolled his eyes, and called her a V. The redhead then rested his chin on his fist, looking interested, and asked for some music to start. When the music hit, it felt like a physical force vibrating through his feet, and he started his routine. He is not going to bother explaining how terrible he actually was, because in his own head he thought he was doing okay, gearing up for his backflip when the music suddenly stopped and he was gasping for air, flailing his arms and panting like an idiot. The blonde kept smiling, but he could see the tension in her face as she tried to stay in her sunbeam character while also judging him. The redhead was the first to speak, giving a sympathetic smile that confirmed he had completely failed. The other two judges, an Asian American guy and a girl with pigtails, were laughing like toddlers until the redhead shot them a warning look. He expected the redhead to politely say he was not good enough, but instead, the redhead tilted his head, chewed on his pen, and said his dance skills were actually good and he liked his movements. But then he paused and said they were looking for positivity, and Alex did not smile even once during his whole routine, making him look stiff and like he was not enjoying himself. He said he liked Alex and his dancing, and knew he could get better with practice at a local dance studio, but unfortunately, he did not fit the profile they were looking for. Evie agreed, saying they valued a positive outlook and enthusiasm, which she did not see in him. The girl with pigtails, still laughing, added that he did not show enough school spirit. The Asian American guy, who seemed to be the leader because he was always in the center joking around, scoffed and said he actually liked it and did not care about school spirit. He slapped the table, ran his hand through his thick dark hair, and tossed his pen at the blonde girl, telling Alex to ignore the clowns and saying he had what it took. He just needed to refine it. He said all Alex was missing was a really enthusiastic grin, and stretched his own lips into the widest smile possible, asking if they looked like a fraternity. The pigtails girl shot him a strict look, asking if he was really disrespecting the alumni who started the group, and the Asian American guy flung his paper at her, saying Sunbeam was just a spirit-driven collective that thrived on joy. They were clearly just playing around and joking with each other, and he could tell by their faces that it was a type of smile he would never be able to copy. The redhead suddenly told them to be quiet and leaned back with his arms crossed, saying that even now, when he was thinking about giving Alex a chance, there was a total lack of hope in his eyes and no excitement. He said that was exactly what they wanted, people who would embody the essence of Sunbeam, and even if he gave him a second chance, his smile would look fake, which was not what they wanted because they needed people willing to shed their earthly inhibitions and become bright guiding lights. Beacons, you say? And they really insisted they were not a secret cult. The redhead poked his paper with his pen, asking if Alex could not just manage one single smile because it would not kill him. That is when the others started laughing again, and he felt an urge to punch him. The Asian American guy twirled his pen and said he was right. They unfortunately did need people who smiled, but told him he could try out again next year and just make sure to wear a smile. He tossed a squash candy bar at him, which just made him feel even more pathetic, and he just nodded in agreement even though he knew it was useless. He did not stay to hear any more comments and quickly left the gym with his stomach churning, convinced they were a cult looking for vulnerable people to sacrifice. Even though a part of him knew they were right that he was not a smiling person, he did not let the tryouts bother him for long, and within a week, he had mostly forgotten about it and focused on his studies. But something felt wrong, like the world had slowed down and stopped making sense, and every day felt like a dream where he was a ghost detached from his own body. It was only several weeks later that the mental fog finally lifted, right when he got the news that all 6 members of the Sunbeam Squad had vanished. He is not sure how he missed the police investigation or the wild rumors, but according to the university, it was not officially a disappearance because they were all over 18. An investigation started when the squad was supposed to perform at Knoxville College but never showed up, and their bus was found abandoned on the side of a deserted road. Memorial vigils were being planned, and not a single body had been found, with the dorm evenings filled with the warm golden glow of candles. Then, the university released another statement saying the Sunbeam Squad was alive and well and had been sent to a special training academy for professionals. When the students were confused, the university reassured them they would return after training, but he was perplexed because Sunbeam did not do competitive cheering, so they did not need elite training. Their movements were often awkward, and he was convinced they thought positivity could fix that, so it made no sense. His skepticism lasted until he saw them with his own eyes a week later, when they returned like nothing had happened. But everyone noticed a change in them. They still smiled and walked across campus, but when no one was looking, they seemed to drift apart, their eyes getting dark and their faces twisting like they smelled something bad. He started to notice their Sunbeam facade was deteriorating from exhaustion, and he attributed it to the rigorous training they must have gone through. Months passed, and he started his junior year, moving into a shared house. The only news about Sunbeam was a rumor that one former member was pregnant, and the rest of the squad remained popular, but people were wary of them, with some even calling them bad luck. It was just a few weeks ago when he got an invitation to the season opener football game, and even though he did not like sports, he needed a break from his huge pile of homework. He was eating a chili dog and a Coke, enjoying the loud and overwhelming smell of fried food, until Sunbeam appeared on the sidelines. He caught a glimpse of them in blue and gold, and a dull ache spread across the back of his head. His housemate asked if he was okay, but he was captivated by their erratic movements as they got into position. They had improved, but every element that defined Sunbeam was gone. Their smiles were forced and unnatural, and instead of jostling and laughing, they moved with perfect robotic synchronicity. Their routine was longer, and when the Asian American guy did a flawless triple flip, the crowd erupted, but his face was completely blank and robotic. They stood rigidly, staring forward, and instead of reassuring smiles or inside jokes, they exchanged smug grins and quick glances, like they were sharing a dark conspiracy. Sunbeam used to cultivate joy, and their smiles used to be genuine, but now they radiated power. The guys prepared a lift, and the girls balanced on top of them, ending with the two main girls high in the air doing high V formations. But they did not stop there. As the crowd clapped, one of the girls slowly raised her arms and pointed finger guns at the audience. She fired twice, and with each pull, her painted lips stretched into a manic grin until her gaze locked onto him. And then, right behind him, he saw it in her glittering, inhuman eyes. He recognized Evie from the start of his freshman year and the disastrous tryouts, remembering her wide smile and passion for the group. But at that moment, he was not seeing Evie the cheerleader. He was seeing something entirely different, a being scanning the crowd for a victim. Her expression changed from delight to something twisted and repulsive, craving the exact opposite of everything Sunbeam stood for. He watched her lips form the silent word drop, drowned out by the crowd but clear as day to him. No sooner had the word left her lips than a scream erupted behind him. He spun around to see a young man collapse onto the ground, pronounced dead just 5 minutes later by his crying girlfriend who tried to do CPR. When he turned back to the field, the Sunbeam squad had vanished. It seemed impossible they could be responsible, but the timing was too perfect, and Evie had aimed her finger guns right when he fell. He knew something was profoundly wrong with Sunbeam, but when he tried to tell people, he was dismissed as crazy. He went to the student information office, but the woman there just gave him a blank stare and a smirk when she heard murder and Sunbeam. She leaned back, called him fascinating, and said he had abruptly departed and was now accusing them of murder, which was factually incorrect because the autopsy said the young man died of a cerebral hemorrhage, not a pretend bullet wound. She asked what his grievance was, and he said he resigned at the end of his freshman year, but she shook her head and said she must be mistaken. The office had a cozy vibe with a leather couch and a fireplace, and he recognized a worn copy of Harry Potter on her desk, which was impossible because he had never been in her office before. He tried to explain that Evie was doing magic, but she interrupted him, telling him to watch his language and suggesting he go to a hospital for his memory lapses. She said his accusations were flagrant defamation and disrespectful to the dead boy's family, and told him to get out and focus on his studies instead of watching too much TV. He left her office firmly, and his housemate was no help, just suggesting he was too obsessed with Sunbeam before leaving for work. He sat in the common area trying to watch Criminal Minds, but his thoughts were stuck on Evie mouthing the word drop, which seemed to have a life of its own. He eventually fell asleep in an armchair, only to be woken up by 3 sharp knocks on the door. He instantly stood up, blinking in confusion because they rarely got visitors, and stumbled to the door, imagining Evie aiming finger guns at his head. But when he opened it, he was surprised to find 3 small children in Halloween costumes, a little witch, a ghost, and a scarecrow, carrying pumpkin buckets for candy. It took him a moment to realize they were trick-or-treaters, even though it was not even mid-October yet. He told them they were a bit early and had no candy, taking a step back to close the door because their blank Unblinking eyes and empty expressions filled him with dread. But then, the scarecrow pulled a knife out of his pumpkin bucket, holding it with a deliberate, experienced grip, and pressed it to his own throat in a slicing gesture. The child let out a high-pitched chuckle, and before he could even register the lunge, the kid moved with impossible speed and embedded the knife hilt into his lower leg. He did not feel the pain at first, just pure adrenaline urging him to escape, and he fell backward, yanking the knife out as blood streamed down his jeans and splattered the wooden floor. The children turned and sprinted down the steps into the darkness, moving strangely like video game characters. The witch shoved an old man and pulled out a gun, pointing it at his head but not firing, and as they disappeared, he saw something in his peripheral vision and heard laughter. The shadows coalesced into 4 figures wearing the school colors, and he immediately recognized Evie, whose fingers were pressed to her nose with a thick trickle of red running down her chin, while the others wiped their faces with their jacket sleeves. The redhead was grinning, still connected to the kids like he was playing a video game, orchestrating the man's death through them. He realized Evie had killed the man with imaginary finger guns, and the others had mind-controlled the children. He pulled out his phone, breathing heavily as the pain started to hit him in waves, and was curled up on the floor when one of them approached. It was the Asian American guy, the one who had been the kindest during the tryouts, but his genuine smile was gone, replaced by something unnatural and hateful. The guy knelt before him, chuckling lowly and saying kids these days were like animals, and his words felt like bullets piercing him. His injury was not critical, but he needed an ER, and as he reached for his phone, the guy snatched it and flaunted it in the air. When he snarled and asked what they did to the kids, the guy shoved him back down, tilting his head in mock bewilderment and saying, "Ouch, that must sting." When he hissed and asked what they did, the guy shoved his finger into the cut and twisted it, saying he did not do anything. But it was not just physical pain. His brain felt like it was boiling, and the guy's voice resonated in his mind, overwhelming him. The world dissolved, and he was no longer in his doorway but walking on bare feet on pristine white tiles, smelling chlorine and old coins, feeling a constant urge to touch his hair but only feeling bare, scarred skin. He was being guided into a white building with glass doors and people in black, and he was forced to experience the redhead's memories in broad strokes. He found himself in a lecture hall with no desks, where the rest of the Sunbeam squad was pressed against the far wall, trembling in terror. They were wearing pale white shorts and bloody t-shirts, with glitter still on their faces and tattered ribbons in their messy hair. Evie was there with partially shaved hair, tapping her bare feet, and a woman with dark crimson hair in a severe ponytail entered and asked if anyone wanted to demonstrate their skills. Evie raised her hand, and the woman, with an overly sweet voice, told her to show them what she had got. A man was brought in with bound hands and blank eyes, and Evie nodded with determination. She cleared her throat and said, "Shatter." But nothing happened. The woman corrected her, saying the word meant nothing without genuine intent. So Evie growled in frustration and said, "Shatter" again. The man's head instantly detached from his body in a torrent of blood, making the girls squeal with delight. As they watched in horror, the squad gradually succumbed to despair over different days, their faces changing and hair growing back as fear turned to elation. A blonde girl disintegrated into a bloody mess on the walls, and the redhead high-fived the pigtails girl, yelling, "Now that's what I'm talking about." One of the girls formed finger guns and said, "Bang," causing unsuspecting people to slump against the wall with obliterated skulls, while the woman's voice crackled over a speaker telling them to keep it up and say, "Divide." The pigtails girl pointed at an old man who was instantly torn apart by an unseen force, his guts splattering on the floor, and the redhead scoffed, saying he could do better. He stepped into the center, pressed 2 fingers to his temples, and said, "Rip it out," causing a subject's eyes to widen as they clawed at their own skull, tearing through flesh. They never saw her extract her own brain because they were already huddled on the floor, screaming into their knees. Then, another scene flashed, where they were cutting their wrists with glass, peeling back flesh to reveal red and blue wires in their muscle and bone. A sharp voice snarled at them for refusing to submit, and a hand struck their face, telling them to mutilate themselves and tear out their own brain stem because that was the beauty of control. The man hissed that words had the capacity to incite bloodshed and plunge the world into desolation, and that they would stand at its epicenter, telling Jason to do it. They called it cutting or erasing, saying the only determinant was intent, and something sharp plunged into their arm, twisting until they screamed. The man said they were the last one and to do it, but their voice fractured, saying they could not. He was dragged down a corridor to a second chamber, and Jason's voice reverberated in his skull, saying, "Drown, drown, drown." They stood at the threshold of a smaller room where a young man in a blood-stained varsity jacket was huddled in the corner. When he lifted his head, he looked exactly like him, with vacant, haunted eyes, like someone had hollowed him out. As abruptly as the memories flooded in, they were torn away, and he blinked rapidly, finding Jason as bewildered as he felt. Jason slowly withdrew his finger from the wound, and he could feel the command clawing through his nervous system. Jason muttered it was just a trick, and he found himself nodding involuntarily, whispering just a trick, as blood trickled from his nose. Jason told him to say it louder, and he screamed, "Just a trick!" with such force it sent him to his knees. Jason frowned, bandaged his wound, and watched in disbelief as his skin slowly mended itself. Then the command ripped through him to go to the kitchen, and his body moved on its own. Jason followed, retrieving a scarf from the table, and told him to get on his knees. He obeyed without hesitation, collapsing on the floor, and Jason tied the scarf over his eyes. The heel of his shoe slammed into the back of his neck, forcing him flat, and Jason said, "I want you to wait for me to kill you." The words burrowed deep into him, so he waited. Even after they left and the door slammed, he waited until morning, when control finally returned to his body and he ripped the scarf off. But he is still waiting, his mind trapped in perpetual panic, flinching at every noise and scanning every shadow. He was taken to the Friday game against Harrington, where Sunbeam did it again, and Evie mouthed something he could not decipher but felt sharp as needles. They had done something to the student body, and ever since then, he has noticed people staring at him with vacant eyes, and sometimes someone brushes past him or fingers tighten around his throat. He keeps catching glimpses of the little witch girl in his peripheral vision, and they are amassing an army, waiting for the moment Jason decides to end him. He wishes he knew what happened to the Sunbeam Squad so he could help them, but something tells him they are far beyond rescue, and so is he. Sometimes he ponders if he will ever be permitted to recall what truly happened to him during freshman year. And ever since entering Jason's mind, he dreams of a white room. Wow. I really have to give a lot of praise and respect to Trash Tia for always bringing us such good and interesting stories. So, I am assuming the original poster possesses these exact same abilities. Would not you agree? Geez, I certainly hope no one else has ever had to endure such a terrible college experience. In any event, that concludes our offering for today. A massive shout out to all my channel members. Your support is immensely appreciated and means the world to me. If you wish to further contribute to the channel, the relevant link can be found in the description below, but this is entirely optional and by no means required. If you enjoyed today's video, please remember to bestow a like and subscribe, as this greatly aids my channel, and I shall see you tomorrow. Thank you for watching. Peace.